Secord, make sure to double check on that trigger warning that's at the beginning there. Yeah, that's going to be a very important trigger warning.
Yes.
This was probably the most graphic explanation we've ever had.
Oh boy. There's another one later, and I'll point it out. Maybe we could do like some sirens or something. Trigger.
Yeah. Warning.
Yeah.
Trigger warning.
Yeah.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
So, yeah.
Warning. This show features dark subjects which may be triggering to some listeners. Listener discretion is advised.
Welcome to Chaos Jar. I'm the loud and obnoxious one, J. West Secord. Hey. Next to me is the host of the show and our big bag of facts, Bad Ben.
Hey.
And as always, we have a cat who's very curious about what we're doing. And donuts. So, as usual, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at BA Chaos Jar. But you can also follow us on Facebook at Chaos Jar Podcast, which is also the name of our YouTube channel. You know, YouTube, the place where people aren't good at podcasts can go to listen to our podcast. Fucking do it! And you can go to my Twitter account, which is I'm glad you asked, _ where you ask me questions and I respond to questions. No one's asked me questions except for one person, and I'm getting very sad. I am not a prolific tweeter. Bird. And, alright?
You're not Bigfoot's lawyer.
Yeah. And, as always, if you want to be a patron, throw us a couple bucks, kind of like, when you tip a waiter, because we don't get paid enough. You may get, like, some extras. I don't know, early access to our bonus episodes. And, a shout-out on the show. It sounds pretty good. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds good to me.
It sounds pretty good. And, you can also go to our Patreon page, and watch the bonus episodes that are out right now.
So what's that Patreon page?
Oh, I'm glad you asked. _ Yeah, that's patreon.com/chaosjar. And as always, it'll be in the show notes below. Now, Ben. Cat. Ben.
Donuts.
Donuts. Ben, what's going in the jar today?
Today, we're going to talk about Hamilton Howard Fish.
I love that play.
It's funny because there was a play.
I know. That was clearly the Hamilton part was the joke I was going for, as the play was a little more obscure and only in our town.
It's a Middle Dakota thing.
Yeah. We're very proud of Hamilton Albert Fish.
It's Hamilton Howard Fish.
Tomato, potato. Anyway, tell me a bit about it.
So, I don't know much about the play that you were part of and how much, like, how factual or how well it went off or what they delved into.
I will tell you this. I was Set designer? No. Prop. I was a prop guy.
Okay.
So I had to get props to design the set.
Yes.
But I wasn't actually designing the set.
Okay.
And all I know is, it was a really, really dark play. And I don't know if these guys will hear this podcast or even give a shit. Yep. But, yeah, there's the burp. That's for you, Bree. But they really wanted to be edgelords.
Okay.
So they made this really, really dark play about this guy, and they tried to make it as disturbing as possible because their goal was to make people leave the theater from pure, disgust.
So, normally when we do these, I try to set up the story behind it, and I don't try to just give away what the person has done originally.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I do know a bit about it, but actually I'm kind of excited about this because obviously as a play, we're looking at characters in the play, and so it's fictionalized versions of real stories, but like I said before, these guys are edgelords, so there's a good chance that the dialogue they made was probably meant to be even darker than it probably should have been. And even then, there's a lot of history that I would like to know about this.
Well, like I was saying, normally I try to keep it, even for the audience, I try to keep it away from the actual what has happened until I reveal what happened. Like Rodney Alcala. We didn't start off with he was a fucking serial killer. I started off with the fact that he was on the dating game. And why did he feel creepy and all that kind of stuff? Well, yeah. We're just going to start off right off the bat because he's a big enough tale on his own. Albert Fish is a serial killer.
Good. Then all that vagary that I was talking about, guess I didn't have to do.
No,
well,
you didn't.
Fuck you, Ben.
Well, there's a lot more to this than that. So, let's even just start off with the weird life. We're going to start off in the first, basically, 10 years of his life to begin with. So, May 19th, 1870, he was born Hamilton Howard Fish in Washington, D.C. And at some point in his childhood, some sources said he was about as old as 15. Others say he was in preschool. But Hamilton begged his parents to let him go by the name of Albert instead of Hamilton because he was being teased by other kids with this nickname of Ham and Eggs. So,
every time you say Hamilton, I giggle a little bit inside and just picture Lin-Manuel Miranda every single time.
Wow. So, as I said, different sources state different times, but just based on the types of teasing that he was getting, I would more think that it was in his younger years that he asked for this.
Specifically, why Albert? That's a interesting name.
Hamilton, was the youngest of four surviving kids. Walter, Annie, and Edwin Fish.
That's 4 kids as in actually 4 kids, not to be mixed up with the poor anime dubbing company of Fox from
4 kids
from the 90s.
So he did have another brother that he never knew because he wasn't alive when he wasn't even born yet when this other brother was alive. But his older brother's name was Albert, but he died in infancy. So when he decided to go by the name of Albert, he basically was assuming he was basically trying to get away from the Hamilton name and probably trying to escape a little bit of his own misery by being this Albert.
By being someone completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Albert's father, we're going to refer to him as Albert from here on out, Albert's father was named Randall Fish, and he was a very poor riverboat captain. Not poor as in skilled-wise, just very, very poor, as in, not wealthy.
Probably because he was really poor at doing it, skill-wise.
So, Randall Fish was 43 years older.
I just realized he's a fisherman.
Yeah. So
Randall Fisherman.
Yeah, Randall Fish. So he was 43 years older than Albert's mother, Ellen.
43 years old?
Yeah, Ellen Fish. Ellen was originally named Ellen Howell, and she was born in 1838. Randall was born in 1795.
Jesus
so
Christ.
At this time, this puts Randall at Albert's birth at 75 years old. And his mother is 32.
Holy shit.
Just think about that. He's 75 and he's not, like, he's still virile. Like,
I actually met someone whose father was, like, in his 80s when they were, like, born. So it's like, I've seen that before, but holy fuck, that's crazy.
So, Randall died of what was the term at the time was called senile debility in 1875. He was listed as having old age in an ambulance after being removed from a dining saloon in Washington, D.C., but more than likely he died of a heart attack. That's basically the assumption.
Because he's old.
Yeah. By this point, I think he's pushing 80. I think he's either 80 or is just before that. So, Albert claims to have very few memories of his father. There's only two really significant ones. One was a memory that Fish would detail later of his dad giving him the nickname Stick in the Mud.
Wow! You just want your child to suffer.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ. Hamilton, Stick in the Mud Fish.
Ham and eggs, stick in the mud. So, when Randall died, Ellen had nothing, because he left nothing for him and his wife and his kids.
What a piece of shit.
Albert and his three siblings were sent to live in an orphanage, where Ellen, who was previously a stay-at-home mom, wasn't able to provide for all of them. So basically, she didn't have any money whatsoever. She had no job, no experience, because she's been fucking with this other guy, like this old man who was a riverboat captain forever, which at 75 years old, I would start looking for something because he's not going to be around forever.
Yeah.
Like,
it's one of those times where it's like the women folk aren't allowed type of thing. And it's like, ugh.
So him and his siblings, they all end up going to a place called St. John's Refuge in Washington, D.C., and it's on the same block where the George Washington University summer and special programs are currently located. And this is where he really started to grow a little bit perverse. He started to show signs that he was that he had a really strong connection between sex and violence while he was in the orphanage. Fish would often be beaten, and by like the nuns and the priests that ran the refuge, as well as the other children, and he would get erections during these beatings.
That seems normal.
Then that would get him even more ridicule because of the fact that he was liking these beatings.
So he more or less grew to be a masochist.
Yeah, sadomasochist. He would state years and years later, that he felt that his time in the orphanage ruined him as a human being. So, at the orphanage records, they describe him as a problem child. He ran away every Saturday. So, I just picture this little kid trying to run away from the orphanage every Saturday, and then they just get used to it, so, like, the fucking nun is standing there.
Like he had a timer set.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, it's 3:00. Time to escape.
It's 3:00 on Saturday. He's playing a game with some of the other kids. Wait, what day is it? It's Saturday. Ah, fuck.
Ah, fuck. knocks the game over. Clean that up, fool!
So, Fish also claims that at St. John's, he was talked into some sort of masturbation game by the other kids. This was a reoccurring situation where he ended up masturbating in front of others at the orphanage. And then if he got caught by the nuns, they would spank him for jerking off, which would then make him even more aroused, which led to more masturbation and then more punishments.
The church doesn't really understand how to deal with this. Yes. Well, we'll just beat it out of you. Yes, Daddy.
All I can think, though, is what kind of masturbation game, because this is like in the 1800s, like the late 1800s. Masturbation games? Like...
Yeah, it's a race to see who comes first.
Oh, God. Playing Limp Bizkit in the fucking hallway.
Limp Bizkit? God, that raptor doesn't exist at this time. Jeez. Silly.
Fred Durst is a fucking dinosaur. Like, so
there's no such thing as a rapper anymore. They're all raptors.
All right.
Okay, sorry. Go ahead.
So, Fish claimed that one of the nuns there had a particular fascination and like a real hard-on for giving boys spankings, especially bare and bottom, and would dole it out for any reason whatsoever. So, like, the slightest infraction, she was like, pull your fucking pants down, I'm gonna slap the shit out of your ass. Like, just for the sake of her own thrill.
I thought we were talking about a serial killer. This sounds like some pretty horny fetish shit.
Yes.
I mean, and like...
he's not even 10 yet. I just want you to think about this.
Wow. We make jokes about not kink-shaming, but don't become a serial killer.
I'm not kink-shaming. I'm kink-asking why.
I'm kink-curious.
So, Albert's family actually had a lot of people already in his family that had mental illness. So I'm sure that he probably had a little bit of this. So at least 7 people apart from Albert himself had various mental afflictions. He had a paternal uncle that was described with a religious psychosis, and he ended up dying in a state psychiatric hospital. A younger brother of Albert's was regarded as feeble-minded, and his mom used to openly quote that he was very queer, and said to have heard things on the street and possibly had delusions, so probably a paranoid schizophrenic. A paternal aunt was considered completely crazy. That's a quote. A brother suffered from chronic alcoholism. One of his sisters had some sort of mental affliction as well. There's probably just a lot of undiagnosed mental health issues in this family. But it's also the late 1800s, so a lot of them are not going to be diagnosed.
God, is it far enough that the most they would get is electroshock therapy?
Maybe something along those lines. Basically, there's also the fact that aging sperm also has shown to have numerous studies that show mental disorders like schizophrenia. From the age of 60 to 80, the rate at which certain genetic mutations are found in sperm can be 3 times as great as that as men in their 20s. So the older you get, even if you're still virile, those sperm aren't always going to be the best quality. They're going to have more mutations within them.
So do you hear that, ladies? 35 is still okay to have a child, but men in their 60s is not. That's a fact for you.
Yeah. So Fish also has has 2 traits that also link him to other serial killers. One is that Fish was also a known bedwetter, which is actually part of in the psychopath checklist or whatever, and the serial killer checklist, symptoms of serial killer. known bedwetting throughout their lives is actually a sign of this.
That is a very, very specific thing.
Yeah. He also fell out of a cherry tree at an early age that causes severe head injury. And it actually left him with severe headaches, dizzy spells, and a pronounced stutter.
So not only was he born with absurd disorders, he might also have brain damage, which causes even more problems with those disorders.
The funny thing is, like, for instance, John Wayne Gacy, Jeffrey Dahmer, I could go on and on and on, like Ted Bundy, they all have that in common as well. They had head injuries when they were young. There are a few serial killers that don't have head injuries linked to when they were younger, but the developing brain being shaken that bad, who knows what happens.
I didn't know John Wayne was a serial killer.
Yeah. John Wayne, the Duke himself.
Yeah. Huh.
So, while at the orphanage, Fish also had another thing that definitely didn't help him out. He witnessed several older boys steal a horse, tie it to a pole in a field close by to the orphanage, before dousing it with something flammable and lighting it on fire. Albert enjoyed witnessing this act, and then would later douse cotton balls in kerosene before inserting them into his anus.
I mean, the easiest way to get a Blue Angel.
So, I will reiterate here, this is all before the age of 10. He is playing masturbation games and getting erections while being beat and linking sex with violence and shoving cotton balls up his ass, with kerosene doused all over them. All of this before the age of 10. That's insane.
That is very insane.
So, in 1879, right before he turned 10 years old, Ellen managed to get a government job, so his mother managed to get a government job, and managed to bring all the kids back home, out of the orphanage. Ellen learns very quickly that most of her children are a little different than when she dropped them off. Especially Albert, though.
Just a little.
Yeah. And
like in cartoons where the eyelids blink at different timing. It's like panning over all the kids, and then there's Albert with his eyelids.
Albert, you really have to work out a system of blinks. And Albert's going to get even weirder throughout the next few years, because Albert gains urolagnia, which is a fetish for drinking urine, along with coprophagia, which is a fetish for eating feces. By the time that Fish turns 12, he had also begun enjoying self-administering pain with a nail-studded paddle or a homemade cat of nine tails. He had also begun to sneak off to public baths in order to spy on boys undressing.
Oh boy.
And then he begins his first homosexual relationship with a local telegraph boy, and most sources link this local telegraph boy to the urine drinking and feces eating, but it's not proven. There's never a name given for this boy. It's all basically off of his own account. So, in 1885, at the age of 15, he quits school and begins working as a house painter. And he became really good at it. In 1890, he relocates to New York City with his siblings and his mother, and he begins a career as a decorator using the skills from his house painting job. He also begins to be a male prostitute, but there's no sources that completely link that other than Albert's own confessions later. This house painting and decorating job gave him access to people's homes and apartments. And he, of course, abuses this and begins to molest children.
Of course.
He personally claimed to have managed to molest at least 400 kids, and his main prey would be young black boys under the age of 6 or young mentally handicapped boys, because he felt that these would be the least likely to be investigated.
Oh, jeez.
So
that's horrible.
He's a real predator. He knows what he's doing.
Were there any female children?
There are some in this as well, but he preferred young males. He also would visit a ton of brothels for both sexes, either male or female, and pay for a lot of sexual acts, but his favorite were the brothels that would beat and torture him. So he does have a masochist side. He really likes that. So in 1898, Albert ends up marrying Anna Marie Hoffman, who is 19 years old. He is almost 30 at this point. His mother had begun to worry about him being a bachelor at his age.
Bachelor?
And set him up with Anna.
That's the big thing to worry about. You know, I don't think he's going to find a date with all this child molesting.
He's super weird. Super weird. I think that a woman will really straighten him out.
Yeah.
He really likes to hang out with the young ones, so let's give him a 19-year-old.
Yeah. Oh, God.
So, Anna Hoffman and him and Albert would end up having 6 children. Albert Jr., Anna Jr., Gertrude, Eugene, John, and Henry.
All right. Well, who's the next kid?
That's it. So Albert was a strong family man, according to his kids, and would always do what was best for his family to make sure that they were completely taken care of. All his children would later recall that he worked super hard to keep them fed, super hard to keep them clothed, and make sure they always had a roof over their head. This includes theft. In 1903, Albert was sent off to Sing Sing prison after being convicted for embezzlement from a store he was working at, so he probably, pulled money out of the till. Yeah. He served 16 months in prison, and while in prison, he would have homosexual relationships with the other men in there, and obviously super enjoy this.
I'm sorry, I just can't get past the fact that this very disturbed man who enjoys sadomasochism and for various bad reasons, and molesting children and all these terrible things, but he's a great father.
That's the crazy thing, too. None of his kids ever reported at all that he ever tried to molest them. They did say he had odd games, especially later on when he starts to lose it a little bit more. He actually, grows a little more mentally disturbed. But he did have odd games that he would like to play with them. For instance, he would make them put their hand behind their back, and he would try to guess the number that was behind their back. And whatever number he guessed, if it was wrong, they would have to spank him or hit him with a nail, that nail-studded paddle in the bare ass however many times. So there were some things that he was just messed up with, but for the most part, he never molested them. He didn't ever try to do anything. He didn't ever try to...
Well, not only that, but just... They were stating he was supportive.
Yeah.
And, he made sure that nobody was unfed. And
that might be, too, because of the way he was raised, though.
Yeah.
He might actually realize how off he is and be like, that's because I lived in the orphanage. I don't want you guys to ever have to go through this. So I'll be a main factor in your life to make sure that you are, well taken care of. But
yeah, kids, just remember me as a good role model. Excuse me, I'm going to go to jail and have sex with many men
for 16 months. After this, after his release, he would later be arrested for writing false checks several times, but each of the charges for the false checks would get him a suspended sentence. So he never really went back to prison, maybe for a couple days or something, but anything major. In 1910, while working as a painter in Delaware, Fish ends up having a sexual fling, and I'm not entirely sure how consensual it was, but it was with a 19-year-old mentally challenged man named Thomas Keaton. Fish would claim that Thomas was looking for an older man to mentor him so he could change his life. And he wanted to change his life because before he met Fish, Keaton was, quote, riding the rails, basically illegally hopping trains and living as a hobo and trading blowjobs for protection. So Albert and Thomas were together for roughly 3 weeks, and they...
Is this while he's still married?
Yes. And so Fish claimed that he brought Keaton to an abandoned barn after about 10 days of sex in a rented room. And in the barn, he tied Keaton up, locked him in a room, and spent 2 full weeks basically just torturing the hell out of him. There's actually a full account of this that Fish would later write out in his days after he was charged with murder. So, I'm going to read this from his writings. So here we go.
Okay.
Quote, I wanted to lash, cut, burn a nice, big, fat, pretty bare ass like Thomas had. Torture him, hear him scream with pain. I could not do it here. Too many people. I began to look around. For about a mile away, there was an old farmhouse. It had the name of being haunted. No one had lived there in several years. It stood back from the road about 200 feet, and at the back of it was a barn. 3 stalls and the room for a carriage. Upstairs, hog loft and a coachman's room. In it was a bed and a chair. The door and the lock were in pretty good order, with a key. It was just a place to whip and torture Thomas just as I wished. I put a chamber in the room for him to use. Then one rainy day, I brought a blanket, and we came to the torture chamber. I made him strip bare naked, locked him in. Then I went back to my room. Next day, I did not go to work. I brought a sharp knife, box of matches, and a pint of alcohol. I went back to the old house and got his clothes and put them with the other things in one of the other stalls. There was a well in the yard, nice cold water. I filled an old pitcher full of water and gave it to him to drink. Then I cut about 20 switches off of blackberry bushes. They were full of thorns. I brought 2 boot straps they used in school. I took up 3 switches and the straps and tied his hands behind him, then his feet. Now I said to him, I have you, just where I want you, and the way I intend to keep you for the next 2 weeks. Then I turned him over on his belly, began to torture his nice fat ass. I used 1 switch at a time, struck him as hard as I could, each blow with the thorns stuck in his flesh. Often I would drag the switch instead of lifting it. Then it would tear and rip the cheeks of his fat ass. How he did scream. It was sweet music to my very soul to hear him and know that no one else could. Then I spanked him. How the blood spattered on the blanket and all over the walls. Then I took the knife and slit his fat ass between the cheeks.
Oh, no! Oh! Oh, no!
I held my mouth to his ass and
I
sucked
thought...
his blood.
Oh, no, it is. He did cut him through the...
Then I filled the pitcher with water, untied his hands, locked him in, and went home. Next evening, I brought another blanket, a small hammer, tacks, and 6 candles. Then I could work in the day and torture him at night. I tucked a blanket over the windows, and by the light of the candle, I could see him. For 5 days, all he had was water and whippings. Then I brought him sandwiches and coffee. He was so hungry, I made him eat his own number 2 before I gave him food. Then I made him lay back in bed. I turned both his legs backwards and his head and strapped his feet to the head of the iron bed. Then I had his nice, pretty fat ass turned up to me to do just whatever I could think, and there was plenty. The whole package of needles in the cheeks of his ass. It looked like a pincushion. I stuck a pin in all the way through his dicky and one between his two balls. That was Saturday night. I left him just as he was all night and went home.
That's just a Saturday night.
Yeah, that was a Saturday night.
So casual.
Sunday, I brought him some food and a bottle of peroxide.
How good of you.
I pulled the needles out of his ass, dicky, and balls.
He left them in there overnight?
Yeah, he left them just like that. How the blood did pour, and I pulled them, when I pulled them out of his dicky, it was as blue as ink. I poured peroxide on his ass and dick and smeared him good with Vaseline. Then I tied his feet and let him rest. He went to sleep. Then I jabbed a long needle in his belly and he woke up. Then I fed him. From 9 a.m. Sunday until 11 p.m., I whipped, cut, burned his bare ass, except at noon and 6 p.m. when I went out for food. To weaken him and keep him, so I gave him food but once a day. I gave him a tablespoon, and he would eat much of his own number 2 out of the chamber.
You know, the reason it's funny is how you read it.
I know.
Because you're so, like, monotone, it's the facts. So when you go, like, I fed him, it just sounds so, like,
I don't...
Yeah, whatever.
What am I supposed to fucking sound excited? Like,
you do remember, you have a performer here
that
who can
is
do
true.
that shit for you.
Oh, fuck.
Anyway, where were we?
So, in a short time, both of us got to like it, and we called it peanut butter, and called number 1 cider. I let him rest about an hour, then I bent his legs over his head again and tied his feet. I switched him hard between the cheeks of his fat ass. Oh my god!
Oh.
And when the thorns stuck in his flesh, I dragged them so they would tear his ass. How he screamed! Then I spilled alcohol on his bare ass and dicky to set him on fire. Oh my god!
Honestly, most of that. Really, I'm okay hearing it. It's the cutting between the cheeks. it's just like when they cut between the fingers. Yeah. You're just like, oh god, that's a cringy pain.
So I clapped my hands, jumped with joy when I heard him scream. Yay! It hurt like hell while it lasted, but the alcohol burned off quick. I spanked him and switched his bare ass until I was all tired out. I spread paper on the floor and made him lay on his belly. I stripped naked and done a heap of number 2 on his ass. Then I turned him on his back so he would be full of it. I had some in my behind, and I sat down on his face and made him lick my bare ass with his tongue. I knew I had him so weak I could master him. Then I let him play Papa. Everything I'd done to him, I made him do to me. He spanked, switched, cut, burned my bare ass. He made me jump and yell when he sunk the thorns in me, then pulled through my flash.
His flash?
Yeah, apparently that's what it says. My flash. How I screamed when he set my ass on fire. It hurt, but I got a big kick, a thrill out of it. Got a big kick. Many times when I had him tied up, I was tempted to slice veal cutlets off his nice fat ass. Take them out in the yard, make a fire, and roast them.
He doesn't know synonyms?
No, he just...
So it just is nice fat ass.
My mouth was fairly watered to see what it would taste like. I always wanted to eat a boy's nice fat ass. I also had a strong desire to cut off his prickin' balls, split them open, roast them, and eat them. But I knew if I did that, I would not have him to torture or be tortured by him. I pissed and shit all over him in his mouth, eyes, ears. He did it to me. I know we ate over 10 pounds of peanut butter and drank several gallons of cider. Between us in the 5 weeks I had him, 5 weeks, I think this is because he wrote this down, I think they misspelled it, but he only had him for 2 weeks. So all things have to end. My job was finished and I could not afford to keep him. Realizing that I must go home, he did not want to put them on, but I opened my pants, took my dick, and he sucked me off. Then I was tempted. I tied him up again, played with his dickie until it got stiff. Then I took my knife and sliced it in half. I shall never forget his scream or the look he gave me. The blood gushed out in a stream. At first I intended to kill him, cut up the body, take it home. But the weather was hot and I knew I had no ice. It would stink and betray me. I poured cold water over his dickie, then slowly poured the rest of the peroxide on the open wound. Then I took the rest of the Vaseline in a clean handkerchief, bound him up, and I untied him. Put his clothes in the chair at the side of the bed. I gave him $10 and kissed him goodbye. Took the first train I could get to get back home. I never heard what became of him or tried to find out. God delivered Jacob and his people out of the hands of their enemies. He smote the Egyptians in their hinder parts. His command is spare not the rod. His holy book says, purge thyself of sin. With the rod the Jews stripped and whipped Jesus with switches before they crucified him. Who am I, most unworthy of sinners, that I should not be stripped and whipped? Abraham offered up his own son as a sacrifice to Almighty God. He cut the guy's dick in half, then gave him $10.
Secord, make sure to double check on that trigger warning that's at the beginning there. Yeah, that's going to be a very important trigger warning.
Yes.
This was probably the most graphic explanation we've ever had.
Oh boy. There's another one later, and I'll point it out. Maybe we could do like some sirens or something. Trigger.
Yeah. Warning.
Yeah.
Trigger warning.
Yeah.
Danger, Will Robinson. Danger.
So, yeah. In January of 1917, Albert's wife Anna Marie elopes with a handyman named John Strobe, who is renting a room from their home, and he abandons Fish and their 6 children. A few weeks later,
wow.
Anna
is the better parent.
So a few weeks later, Anna returns, and she tells Fish that Strobe had beaten her, and Fish, at the urging of their kids, takes her back. Then a few days after returning, Anna smuggles John Strobe back into the house, hiding him in the basement, and when Albert finds out, he kicks them both out, and then they later return to steal all the family's furniture before leaving and never coming back. Again, he's the better parent.
Yeah, Jesus, like, I left for like 2 weeks to go torture and fuck some dude. But you eloped and left our children.
Then,
how dare you?
Came back and stole all the furniture.
No, came back, cheated on me in the house, and then stole the furniture. Like, I'm eating a donut.
So, this begins... what I love about this is most articles are like, this begins his spiral into madness. I think he was already fucking there.
This begins it.
Yeah. But this is where he really starts to go even more downhill. So, on one occasion shortly after this, Albert spent an entire evening lying on the floor wrapped in a carpet. When he was asked by his kids why he's doing this, he said because John the Baptist told him to.
Honestly, I was hoping for the answer of depression. Because I think I've done that. Wrap myself in a carpet.
Just lay on the floor.
I'm sad.
Then his kids caught him climbing a nearby hill and watched him stand up and shout at the moon over and over, "I am Christ! I am Christ!"
So, in other words, the H in Jesus H. Christ is Hamilton.
That was good.
Thank you.
So, his children began coming home and finding their dad just beating the shit out of himself all the time with studded paddles. He'd encourage them to beat him as he crouched on all fours on the floor. And this is also when he starts to stuff things into his anal cavity again, like cotton balls soaked with alcohol or kerosene, and then this time he starts setting it on fire. He also started inserting sewing needles into his body, especially around his pelvic region. He would insert them all the way in, like not just like on the surface, like right in there as far as he could. He also focused on his scrotum, his anus. He even tried to insert them directly into his testicles, but he said that the pain was too intense even for him.
It takes a new meeting to when, you have pins and needles and you sit in the wrong position.
Wow. There are pictures online from Albert Fish being x-rayed after he was put into prison. And he had so many needles inserted into him, so deep, that the x-rays show all these needles in his abdomen and stuff.
Jesus.
Like, at first I didn't believe that, and I looked it up, and sure enough, there was fucking pictures, and I was like, wow. Like...
Yep. See, this is why butt plugs have this little flat bit at the end, so you don't push it all the way in. You can pull it back out.
Albert starts traveling around the country looking for work and sending enough money back home to keep his kids fed.
God!
He's still the better parent. Like,
I want to see a daytime movie about Albert Fish, the Great Father.
I know.
Like, you just ignore all the bad stuff he's doing in around the outside. It's just from the kid's perspective.
Not even just that, they still throw out the insinuation of him being a serial killer. Like, but like it's like a passing thought all the time.
Yeah, like the only parts when you see that is when he's going mad and he's like beating himself in front of them. Like, it's just, but for the most part, he's just a great dad. Dad went on another trip, but he sent us enough money for food.
Yeah.
What a great dad.
So he, during his travels, he would claim that he had raped over 100 children and would even brag that he had at least a kid in every state. Fish would normally gag these kids, tie them up, and beat them, and but he preferred not to gag them if he could, because he liked to hear the cries. He also felt that God had ordered him to start castrating little boys. Quote, I had sort of an idea through Abraham offering his son Isaac as a sacrifice. It seemed to me that I had to offer a child for sacrifice to purge myself of iniquities, sins, and abominations in the sight of God, such as Sodom and Gomorrah. So during this time, Fish also begins to take up an unusual thing of writing obscene letters.
That's the unusual part.
This is the unusual. So he would target mainly through matrimonial agencies and stuff like that. So basically these were ads that were put out there by women who are looking for a new husband or looking for a family, because back then dating sites weren't a thing, obviously. So he would write to them, and they're already
not a thing.
And they'd already be desperate, or they'd be widows, and so they'd be like, I have money from my husband passing away, but I need a new man, because widows are old maids, right?
Right.
So
he's got to be in his 40s, 50s now.
Yep, basically.
Yeah.
So Fish would get the mailing addresses of random women through these agencies, or he'd also prowl through for people looking for boarders in their houses. So they're a widow or they're a woman that are renting out an apartment or something like that, and he would write to them. Or he'd be looking for caregivers. So he would write to women that are offering caregiving services and write obscene letters to them as well.
You know, I almost like, you know, those like old 80s dating videos that you see, and it's like, I just like picture that, but it's Albert Fish, and he's like, hey, I'm a great dad.
I'm a great dad. I know where to find abandoned farms.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I can paint your house.
Sound like the...
Make sure you have some kids.
You sound like the Hurley boy in that when you said that.
Wow.
Let me paint your house, please. Just let the boy paint your house. That is an old SNL reference. If some people are a little too young to get that.
All right. So in his letters, Fish would often present himself as a successful Hollywood producer looking for a place to board his teenage son. He would present the boy as well-built but mentally handicapped and in need of constant discipline.
Handicapped. Yeah, handicap. He just walks around with a small calf.
His hand is a calf.
You're gonna just swipe over my pun?
The fact that he walks around with a small calf.
Yeah, a baby cow.
Yeah. But
his hand is that baby cow.
No, his hand is a calf, like your calf.
Oh, but my pun worked better. Fuck you.
All right. Anyways, so
baby calf.
Yeah. So Fish would go on to describe exactly how and how often he expected his fictitious son to be beaten. Like, if the landlady was agreeable, and a lot of people were, like, it was surprising, he would offer promises of large sums of money. He would follow up with another letter and then another letter and over, and they would become more and more depraved and graphic as time went on. And then he would start to introduce the desire that when I come to visit him, you could do this to me as well. And then ask for them to offer descriptions of what they would do to him. And then he would also ask them to allow him to drink their urine and eat their shit. As one does.
Cider and peanut butter?
Yes, that's just true. Sorry.
Yeah.
So, in 1919, 49-year-old Fish may have committed his first ever murder. He never confessed to this murder, which is odd because he did confess to a lot of them. But reportedly, they think that he stabbed and killed a mentally challenged boy in Georgetown, the Georgetown area of Washington, D.C. On July 11th, 1924, 8-year-old girl narrowly avoids being abducted and basically murdered and sexually tortured then murdered, when she encounters 53-year-old Albert Fish. The girl's name was Beatrice Keel, and she was approached by an elderly stranger with a gray mustache who offered her a nickel if she would go into the woods with him to pick wild rhubarb.
Oh.
And Beatrice was interrupted in the middle of this encounter by her mother, who saw the elderly gentleman approach her through the kitchen window, and she went outside and confronted the elderly gentleman, who fled, and later Beatrice's father, Hans Keel, found the old man, who was Albert Fish, sleeping in his Staten Island barn. So this is way back, before Staten Island became like a very industrial and residential area, and they kicked him off the land. So basically, he was just hanging out here and like thought that he could steal a girl. But they're not confirming if it's Albert Fish, but it more than likely is, because very close by on July 14th, so this is July 11th that this happens, on July 14th of 1924, Francis Xavier McDonald was playing on his front porch in Long Island, New York, while his mother sat close by nursing his sister. The mother noticed a man who kept mumbling to himself and clenching and unclenching his fist with a gray mustache. Several hours later, a witness saw a man of the same description, and witnesses would later say that this was Albert Fish. That watched Albert approach Francis while he was playing ball with 4 other boys. He called Francis over, and the other boys continued to play. And then, moments later, both Francis and the old man had vanished. Francis's father, Arthur McDonald, was a police officer and put all hands on deck to try and find his son. And they searched late into the evening but couldn't find him. Eventually, Francis's body was found the next morning by 3 volunteer Boy Scouts. His body was a few hundred yards into the woods, not quite concealed under a pile of leaves or broken branches. So he just kind of shoved things on and thought that'll be good enough.
Yeah.
Francis had been severely beaten, then strangled to death with his own suspenders. They were so tightly wrapped around his throat that they cut into the flesh and drawn blood. The boy's shorts and underwear had been ripped off his body, leaving him naked from the waist down, and he had clear signs of being sexually assaulted. His body was covered in severe lacerations, and most of the flesh on his left hamstring was gone. And it's really, really good chance that Fish took this flesh and went home with it to eat. Because at this time, Fish had actually gotten into a habit of eating raw meat that he would serve to not just himself but his children. And later on, he does become very infatuated with the idea of eating humans, as is said in that letter of the account about how he wanted to cut up that poor Thomas guy's body up.
There were a few moments of that hinted about in that play I was talking about.
Yeah. So Francis McDonald had raisins in his stomach. He had eaten them shortly before death. It's more likely that this was what was used as a treat to lure him away from his friends. Fish did later confess to McDonald's murder, and he said that he intended on castrating him, but heard someone coming, so he just ditched the body as fast as he could after that. February 11th, 1927, another child is murdered by Albert Fish. 4-year-old Billy Gaffney disappeared in Brooklyn. Billy was hopping on nearby trolleys with an older man, fitting Fish's description that evening. After Fish's arrest, the trolley conductor, Anthony Barone, and the trolley driver, Joseph Meehan, both recalled seeing Billy with an old man fitting Fish's description, and they remembered that Billy crying out throughout the journey. After seeing Fish's picture in the paper, Meehan basically was like, that's the guy. Billy had just turned 4 when he was taken. His best friend, Billy Beaton, was only 3 years old on this afternoon. Both boys were playing in the corridor of the Brooklyn apartment where they were at, and another boy, 12-year-old John McNiff, came out for a little while and joined a little game they were playing. Then Johnny's little sister, who was babysitting, started crying, and he went inside. Johnny was babysitting his little sister. She started crying, he went inside to check, and when he came back, both boys were gone. So, when Billy's father popped out of the apartment a moment later and when Billy Beaton's father popped outside and was like, "Where's Billy?" Johnny said, perhaps they went to the Gaffneys, because it's Billy Gaffney and Billy Beaton. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of Billys.
There's a lot of B's.
Yeah. The two ran over to the Gaffney apartment, and the boys were not there. So Beaton's father, raced out and looked around the block, found nothing. They then raced up towards the roof of the apartment building, and on the top floor, Mr. Beaton spotted his son, Billy Beaton, standing by the ladder that led up to the roof. He grabbed Billy and asked, "Where were you?" And Billy Beaton said, "We were on the roof." And then they asked, "Where's Billy Gaffney?" And Billy Beaton, Billy Beaton's father asked, "Is he still up there, like up on the roof?" And the little boy shook his head. And then when his dad asked, "Well, where is he then?" Little Billy told him the boogeyman took him. So,
my God, that was a tongue twister of
I know.
a fucking paragraph there.
Yeah. So, in 1929, there was a letter to a woman whom he was trying to get to take care of his fake child, Bobby. And I only mention this because it falls into the timeline properly, so I'm like, you know what? I might as well read it, and it'll just show you what these letters are kind of like. We will read another series of letters of somebody who was more participating of this later that helps in a different kind of investigation, but this is really fucked up.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This is fucked up.
Yes. So, I wish you could see me now. I am sitting in a chair naked. The pain is across my back just over my behind. When you strip me naked, you will see a most perfect form. Yours, sweet honey of my heart. I can taste your sweet piss, your sweet shit. You must pee in a glass, and I shall drink every drop of it as you watch me. Tell me when you want to do number 2. I will take you over my knees, pull up your clothes, take down your drawers, and hold my mouth to your sweet honey fat ass, and eat your sweet peanut butter as it comes out hot and fresh. That is how they do it in Hollywood.
Wow, Hollywood?
It gets worse. Bobby, who is his fake son, does not wet or muss his clothes or the bed. He will tell you that when he has to use the washroom, the toilet, number 1 or number 2. For number 1, his pants must be unbuttoned at the crotch and his monkey taken out. His pants and drawers must be made his pants and drawer are all made in the drop seat. With a drop seat. There we go. Okay. All you have to do is loose the 3 buttons in the back when they and down they come. Saves a lot of undressing. Handy when you want to spank him. Just drop the seat of his pants and drawers. You don't have to strip him except at night or to give him a bath or a switching. The doctor says 3 or 4 good spankings a day on his bare behind will do him good, as he is nice and fat in that spot. It will be an aid to him when he don't mind you. Then you must strip him and use a cat o' nine tails, and say you won't hesitate to paddle or cat o' nine tails on him when he needs it. So, these are the letters he's sending to people. And then a lot of these people responded to him. I want you to think about that. They responded to him making these things.
Honestly, all I can think of is, wow, that play was just not enough. They did barely anything, that play.
So, we're going to go to May 25th, 1928. So, we're going to introduce Edward Budd. He was riding the subway in Manhattan to pay for a small ad in the Sunday paper, and it read, "Young man, 18, wishes position in country. Edward Budd, 406 West 15th Street." Edward had been working as a part-time truck driver, and he was not able to find full-time employment, and this is in the 20s, before the Great Depression. So he wanted to get out of the city for the summer and find some farm work, basically, like something more laborious to do that would give him more money. So his mom suggested placing a classified ad in the New York World, and Edward went and did that. And the ad is then found by Albert Fish.
Oh.
So that was the 25th that he placed the ad. The 28th, 58-year-old Albert shows up at the Budd house pretending to be a farm owner named Frank Howard. Howard tells the Budd family that he spent most of his life working as a painter and a decorator in Washington, D.C. And he said that he saved enough money to buy a small farm on Long Island. He said that there was a lot of chickens and cows, and he needed some work, like some people to come in and help him take care of this, and that he already had a cook and 5 farmhands, and they all made a steady income, so he's needing some more people to bring on to help him with what's going on. One of his workers had also just decided to move on, so he needed to replace him. So, Edward Budd is being sized up by Mr. Howard here, who is Mr. Fish, and that's when he starts to think about what he did to Thomas Keaton and how he plans on doing this with Ed Budd.
That's where I thought this was going.
So Fish tells Ed Budd that he'd pay him $15 a week, which was really good money at the time. And it made Ed really interested in this.
Plus, an extra 10 to have your dick split in half.
Yeah. So then Ed asked if his friend Willie could also have a job, and Fish agreed. So Fish told him to pack up some work clothes, and that he'd be back for them on Saturday, June 2nd. So when Saturday came, Mr. Howard didn't show up. He had sent a Western Union telegram saying that he was delayed and he would be there the next day. So this was actually because Fish needed a little more time to put together the bondage and torture materials that he would use to subdue and tie up 2 strong men. So Fish at this time is almost 60. He's 5'5" and about 130 pounds. But he was really tough for his size, but he couldn't take these guys in a fair fight. Like, he couldn't take one of them in a fair fight, let alone both of them. So he needed to come up with some really different ways of doing this. So on June 3rd, he does show up at the Budd house, and he gave Ed's parents, Delia and Howard Budd, a basket of fresh strawberries and cheese that he purchased at a local market. And he told the Budds that he brought it from his farm. So he bought it at a market. This ruse is just going. He had lunch with the family, and they waited for Ed to come back because Ed is off at his friend Willie's place. And this is when he's introduced to 10-year-old Gracie Budd, who is Ed's little sister. And this is when he decides that he's going to change plans.
This is the play.
So, comes up with a story about his sister throwing a birthday party for nearby for his niece, and when Ed and Willie returned, he gave them some money to watch a local movie. He apologized for the further delay. He'd actually been hanging out with Gracie a little bit and said that she looked like a good counter and gave her some money to count, which was the biggest wad of money that the family had ever seen. And he got her to count it all out, and she said that there was $92.46. Which, biggest wad of money they'd ever seen. $92. So, he's like, I gotta go to that, and then I'll be back for the boys. And then as he's about to leave out the door, he all of a sudden turns around and is like, you know what? What if I took little Gracie there? She might have a good time at the party and stuff like that. And so, this is a lot more trusting days. Even though Gracie's mother, Delia, was a little more hesitant, Howard thought, you know what, she doesn't get out very much, might as well let her go and have some fun. It'd be good for her. So, he gave Ed and Willie some money to go to a local movie, and he takes Gracie off to the party. So, Delia would later say about Albert why he was such a gentle sort of man, you wouldn't think he would step on an insect. He was so kind and fatherly, how he fooled us. Ed and Willie went to the movies, and a few minutes later, Gracie left with Albert, and no one would ever see her again. Throughout the summer of 1928...
So, just for clarity, that is the basis for that play I was telling you about, is they showed the Budd family and how Fish takes Gracie.
Okay. So, through the summer of 1928, thousands of people helped look for Gracie Budd. She appears on the front pages of papers, flyers are distributed. They comb through neighborhoods and forests, and they're just looking for any tracks, whatever. And the authorities are come to realize that Frank Howard is an alias, but they couldn't figure out his real identity yet. Suspects gathered, and one man, convicted felon Albert E. Cortnell, was charged for the kidnapping Grace after her mother Delia positively identified while being delusional with grief. So there's a problem with trying to get people in the lineups and things like that for like recognition. Victims or witnesses want to fill a blank, so they will falsely identify somebody, not trying to, but their mind will be like, look for any sort of detail that matches in any way, and we'll put it together for them.
Yeah.
So, charges are later dropped for him, and then a man named Herbert J. Sherry was briefly investigated, and then Charles Howard, a 50-year-old man from Florida, who was on the run for defrauding his new bride of $2,800, was investigated. The woman contacted the police to report the crime and said that Charles might actually be Frank Howard. So Charles is arrested, placed in a lineup, and he is identified by Delia Budd again. So she's not the most reliable for this. Like, come on. Like, Charles Howard, however, was able to provide a watertight alibi, and was off the hook for kidnapping. So, on September 3rd, 1930, a woman named Jessie Pope was told the police that her estranged husband, Charles Pope, had done the kidnapping. According to Mrs. Pope, she received a telegram from her husband the day of the Budds' kidnapping, asking her to meet him at the corner of High and Smith Streets, a few blocks from her residence. When she arrived, she found her husband waiting with a pretty brown-haired girl about 10. He asked her to look after the girl for a few days, but she refused. Pope then left in a huff, taking the girl with him. Delia Budd was brought in yet again, and for the third time in a row, she identifies Charles Pope as the kidnapper. So, she's not good for this. You'd think, you would just think that they would be done with her, with her being the one to identify this.
At this point, I feel like she would have learned.
Yeah. So, Charles goes through hours of interrogation and sticks to his story. I didn't do this. My wife has it out for me. Ever since I was made the executor of my father's $30,000 estate, she's just been after me. Basically, she wants that money, and if I go to jail, she gets that money because she's my wife, and then she can divorce me immediately. So, he added that he had his wife committed to an asylum in an attempt to get her hands on her hands on the money. Sorry, his wife tried to have him committed to an asylum to get her hands on the money, so he's insane. I get my fucking money.
Yeah.
Whoa. So, Pope was charged and sent to trial. On December 22nd, 1930, the judge listens to the testimony of the only two eyewitnesses, Delia Budd and Jessie Pope. Delia Budd really surprises the court when she states that her early identification of Pope was mistaken. Mrs. Pope then squirmed and contradicted herself numerous times in her cross-examination, and eventually admitted that she did this because she's holding a grudge against her husband. The judge reprimanded her and instructed the jury to return a verdict of not guilty, which they did. And after being in police custody for 3 months, Charles Pope is out and free. You imagine 3 months of this. So February 6th...
Well, it could have been worse. Could have cross-examined himself.
This is true. For 5 hours.
For 5.
So, while this is all happening, on February 6, 1930, 59-year-old Albert Fish marries 46-year-old Mrs. Estella Wilcox. She's from Waterloo, New York, and she has several kids from a previous marriage. He met her through the matrimony agency. he remained married to her for 10 days. First of all, she answered his letters. So during this, he played some games with his stepchildren that really hit the nail on the head for how creepy he actually is. He called one game Buck Buck How Many Hands Up, which is a game he played with his kids. It meant it had fish dressing in just a tiny pair of brown shorts, and then closing his eyes and guessing how many fingers the children were holding in the air. And then he would guess wrong, because he always wanted to guess wrong. And the kids would then use a paintbrush to spank their stepdad. And how this game, it was basically the difference in it. So if he guessed like 10 and they only had 6 fingers up, they'd hit him 4 times. So, for sure he's peeking at this. 50.
Yeah.
Oh, darn it. You got me again.
You have 50 fingers held up.
So, another game they play is Sack of Potatoes Over. So this would involve Fish being shirtless, and he would throw the children over his shoulder, and they would slide down his back, digging their nails into his flesh.
Oh, Jesus.
And then the other game that he would play, which he introduced on the 3rd day of his marriage, was basically how many needles you can shove under your fingernails. He would shove needles under his fingernails. So after all this, and the 10 days passed, of course his new wife fucking gets the fuck out of there.
Man, who would have thought that the guy who wanted to eat my piss and shit would be so creepy?
So on June 4th...
Where's his son?
So on June 4th, 1934, 6 years and 1 day after she disappears, the Daily Mirror in New York ran a photo of 2 soldiers posing with their dates. That month, the New York City played host to the U.S. Navy, and they had the entire 185 warships all in New York Harbor. And they also bring in 22,000 enlisted men to the city. And this is also when Adele Miller, who is a Brooklyn housewife, becomes completely convinced that in all of this whole thing, there's she sees Grace Budd. No, wait. Yeah, so she basically cuts out a photograph of Grace Budd with a pair of scissors and then drew an arrow with a caption, "This is the girl Grace Budd," then mailed it to the Budd family. Okay, that's what happens. She is basically... So she found a photo in these pictures of these people coming over and was like, "This is your daughter." I see. I got lost in that for a second. It's a quote.
I noticed. You're a little...
Yeah, it was a quote that came out of one of the things that I wrote. So basically, she's reading through and she sees kids that are obviously coming with these enlisted men. And she's like, "This is your daughter." So she mails it to the Budd family. And this sparks a new thing for Delia to be like, "It's Grace." Because she's terrible at finding, identifying people.
She is so good at it.
Yeah. So the next morning, Delia and her husband take the subway across to the Missing Persons Bureau and show it to Detective King. And the newspaper had ended up with the story being reprinted, along with a copy suggesting the Budd girl had been found. And the woman in the photograph, 16-year-old Florence Swinney, walked into the police station in the Bronx on Thursday, June 14th, and identified herself, so obviously she's not Grace. The Budd family were left with literally nothing again. So this actually isn't a total loss because this led to renewed interest in the Budd case, and some articles start to come out there a lot more. In 1934, Albert Fish, so while this is happening, Albert Fish has correspondence with a woman named Miss Grace Shaw, who is a middle-aged housewife from Queens, and he is 64 at this time. So he is 64, she's middle-aged, and so he begins this. September 30th, 1934. My dear Miss Shaw, I am a widower with a son of 19 who is semi-invalid. I am a director in the movies and must be back in Hollywood, California by October 15th. Before I go, I must see him placed in incompetent hands in some good private home. One that does not look or smell like a hospital or institution. I am well able and quite willing to pay a good price for Bobby's care. But my instructions must be carried out. Here is the case. When 5, he fell down the cellar stairs, sustained a brain concussion, and has never been really normal since. Though going on 20, good-looking, well-built, fully developed, he has the mentality of the age when he fell. Every part of his body has grown but the brain. He is harmless, just so easy to spank or switch as a child of 5. When 12, he had an attack of infantile paralysis. He can walk, run, jump, get in and out of the bathtub alone. No lifting to do or wheelchair to push. He has very little use of his hands or arms. Has to be washed, dressed, undressed, given a bath, rubbed all over daily with alcohol and assisted in the toilet. He gets cross and cranky at times, don't always mind. I am trying out European treatments in such cases. Professor Cairo of Vienna, Austria, recommends it. He says that when he gets a spell, he must be whipped. I love that he said that some professor in Vienna is like, when he starts to be a little tantrumy, you gotta whip the shit out of him.
Yeah, but when in doubt, whip the shit out.
Yeah. They are having great success over the cases over there in cases like it. So, you see, as his own father, I would sooner have him whipped anyhow than have him lose his reason entirely. Should you take him in charge on the first occasion he shows temper, spank him soundly as you would a small boy, and don't hesitate to use a cat o' nine tails on his bare behind when necessary. If interested, state your terms and when you can receive him. He is now in Philadelphia in charge of a colored woman I have known for 25 years. She says whipping is the best medicine she ever used. I will call on you. Sincerely yours, Robert E. Hayden. So, Miss Shaw does name her terms. Because he does send another letter. I don't have any of her letters, unfortunately. I only have his.
Oh, man.
So, Albert writes back on October 2nd, 1934, My dear Mrs. Shaw, just got home and found your letter. I am so glad you were interested. Before I call on you, will you kindly advise me, are you a widow? And if so, would you consider another marriage? Will the presence of your daughter in your own home prevent you from taking care of my son? You know, there are some women who think it immodest to strip a boy naked who is over 10 years old unless he is their own son. I know you are not ashamed to strip, bathe, rub, spank, or switch my son, or you would rather not have to answer my letter. However, I shall feel much more at ease if you will say that you are not in your next letter. Would phone, but don't hear very well. Okay. Would phone, but don't hear very well. Will call on you as soon as I get your answer. Yours very truly, R.E. Hayden. So I'm guessing Mrs. Shaw kept this going because October 4th, Fish sends her a letter saying, My dear Mrs. Shaw, just got your very nice letter. I am much pleased to know that you are not one bit ashamed to strip Bobby naked and bathe him. Am also glad you spoke to your daughter and she is willing to aid you in taking care of him. There is no reason why either of you should be. You know, times have changed and so have people. What in times past was considered immodest is now a very commonplace. Then again, look at what young girls training to become nurses see and touch in hospitals. Bear in mind that is for Bobby's own good, that he is to be whipped. So don't let your heart stay your hand. Do you know what I feel? In part, I am to blame for the condition Bobby is in. My conscience says that for being careless, I should be whipped. In the same manner and place, you whip Bobby. Someday, I hope you will be able to accommodate me. I would give you a new $100 bill for a good old-fashioned spanking and a taste of the switch once again. This is a place on 42nd Street called Fisherman's Bath. There is a place on 42nd Street called Fleischman's Bath. Fisherman's Bath.
Fisherman's Bath.
Yeah, Fleischman's Bath, where naked men are rubbed over by women. White, black, Chinese. Most women would get a kick out of spanking a naked man, but I prefer some privacy in home. Am 33 degrees Mason and will be busy next 2 days. How about Sunday afternoon or night? Let your daughter read this letter. I am a man of my word, and I'm a man of the world, and she can get knowledge of the world through it. I feel we shall be fast friends. Sincerely yours, Robert E. Hayden. And again, she must have responded because he sends her another letter on October 7th, 1934. My dear Mrs. Shaw, I've been called to Philadelphia on some important business. While there, shall make arrangements to have Bobby transferred on here, and will then turn him over to you and your daughter for his treatment when you are ready for him. I have paid his board and cared up to October 15th. You see, I am never sure just where I will be until December 31st when my contract expires. I have always made it a custom to pay several weeks in advance. Now, in your letters, you have made no mention of your financial condition. You may be short of funds. If you are, don't hesitate to say so. You can give me your answer through Mr. Pell, the bearer of this, and I will advance you as much as you may require. Mr. James W. Pell is a friend and ward of mine, and he has been declared incompetent, and I have $32,500 of his money in trust. He had a nervous breakdown and was in a nearby sanitarium for 21 weeks at $100 a week. He is without a living relation, and I don't see why you can't take him and so earn some of his money as well. 2 of his sons were blown to pieces in the war. At times, he imagines he is a boy at school, has been naughty, and must be spanked. Dr. Lamb said to humor him, let him be a boy all over again and spank him. He gets short of breath and is subject to fits when in water. For that reason, he must never take a bath alone. The least I have in mind is this: you have told me that you're not. I need not worry about you being ashamed to strip Bobby naked and spank his bare behind. If you're not ashamed of Bobby, you won't be ashamed of Jimmy. One bare behind is the same as another. Take him upstairs, undress him, give him a bath, and then spank him good. He will say, "Teacher, whip me." I shall not leave for Phila until Jimmy returns with your answer. Hope someday you will call me by my first name. How about my spanking? Do I get it? Oh, I hope so. Sincerely yours, Robert E. Hayden. It gets more.
There's more.
There's more. She's still writing back.
Jesus. So the idea is that he starts by saying, it's for my son. But then he's like, oh, there's this older gentleman. He's gonna come in before my son, and you tell me if, and he's gonna tell me if you did a good job or not.
Yeah, he's kind of the test for you.
Yeah, okay.
So, and of course, this older gentleman is Albert Fish.
What?
Twist!
What a twist!
Like
that's a twist sound.
It's like an M. Night Shyamalan.
This story just got M. Night shat upon.
Literally.
Oh!
So,
feces eating!
October 8th, 1934. My dear Mrs. Shaw, I had a friend of mine drive Mr. Pell, or Jimmy, to Little Neck. They stopped at Little Neck Parkway and asked a policeman where your street was. They spent nearly an hour walking up one street and down another. It was so dark, they could not see the numbers. Someone told them of a Mr. Charles Shaw, an electric engineer, and a Dr. Shaw, but Jimmy got tired out. When I returned home, I found him all in. He had the other letters with him and was all set for a good old-fashioned spanking from both of you. That is, of course, when the Mister is not at home. You can arrange that. I shall be in Philadelphia for a day or two, may go to Washington, D.C. before I return. Meanwhile, you can write me, Bellevue, Stratford, Pennsylvania. And if you are ready for Jimmy, write him at his address in New York City. I am very sincerely yours, Robert E. Hayden. P.S. In 1928, Mr. Pell was operated on it for a hernia. When you have him stripped, you will see a mark of the incision. Look on his left groin, from his penis to his hip bone. It was prepared for another operation 10 days ago. His hair is all the hair shaved off. That is why he looks like a picked chicken. He was found to have a bad heart, so it was called off. When you or your girl spank him, don't use your hand. If you have not a paddle, use the back of a hairbrush or get a few switches. There is plenty of them near your home. I know Jimmy gave you would give you $100 bill for a good sound spanking, so I shall take it out of his money for you. So spank, spank, spank. Harry K. Thaw gave $100 bills to the girls for a spanking. Only he'd done the spanking on the girls' bare behinds. He met them at the stage door, took them to his room at the Astor House, stripped them naked, turned them over his knee, and used a paddle. Many of them came 2 or 3 times a week to be spanked and get that $100. Show me a girl who is nice and has some modesty, but not too much. It don't pay your rent or taxes or buy the baby shoes. Out in Hollywood, Laura LaPlante came into my office dressed in her birthday suit, sat in my lap. We have an old Roman gypsy woman who tells all the girls they can catch a man naked in his home, whip his bare behind with switches, then kiss him, and she will surely marry him. Now they all carry switches. Jimmy has a habit of painting his behind red or in gold. When you strip him, you will see. I have just told him what to expect. I've told him just what to expect at your home. He is pretty tough. Don't be shy or slow in laying it on his behind. Limber your arms for Bobby and his daddy, Robert.
Oh my God.
So she gave him a fake address. But she's still responding. October 24th, 1934. He's really in this.
I'm really in this.
My dear Mrs. Shaw, you have struck the nail on the head at last. You've been too modest. Take 100 girls and give each of them a chance, and give each of them the chance I gave you, and 99 of them would have jumped at it. Bobby is still in Philadelphia. He only had to pay it up to the 15th, remember? So he's paid even more. Bobby is still in Philadelphia in the charge of some colored woman. I am paying her $50 a week. It is not a question of price, but service. He seems to like the colored women. Seems to like colored people, and I have found that colored women and girls enjoy the job of spanking and switching a naked white boy or man. My God. Especially
These are starting to get repetitive.
Yeah, especially is it. So with the girls, regardless as to their age or size, there are many things about Bobby of which I have not written. Not because of modesty, but because I knew you would find out. I may as well speak of it now. He has a strong tendency to play with himself. Masturbation. Thanks for clarifying. That I've been advised to have him altered or sterilized. Now, as to Mr. Pell or Jimmy, I love that he's going right back to this. He is not a bit loony. His hobby is to be whipped. I wanted you to try your hands out and get bare behind just a sample of what Bobby would get. He would come to your home and be stripped, well spanked and switched, put on his clothes and return to me. He is able to do so. Now, if the mister is at home in the evening, it would embarrass both of you. It can be done in the daytime, any hour you say, take him to the house, go to his bare behind with a will. Now, my dear, I think I deserve the same, don't you think so? I have some money to pay you for it, and am not stingy. So, any hour you say for Jimmy, Daddy later on. Now you just drop modesty, speak plain, Robert. P.S. I can almost hear the smacks of Bobby's bare behind as those colored girls spank him. Your turn next. They're legitimately...
Does this just go on forever and ever?
It goes on till the 2nd of November, the 9th of November.
So how many letters is that from where we left off?
Now it's 2 more letters.
Oh my god!
So
I don't think we can listen. This is getting a little slow here, bud.
So he goes through this whole thing again. The last letter is the most important, though, because he does mention the name Grace, but it's because her name is Grace Shaw.
Right.
And he calls her sweetest little girly Grace. And then he goes into the whole thing about him being, he wants her to call him Robert. He calls her honey heart of mine. And then he gets into this whole thing about, because she is now played into the fact that, okay, I'll do it. And he's now bringing up the inevitable thing that he's going to have her drink, he's going to drink her piss and have him eat her shit. And he ends with, your nice, pretty, fat, sweet ass. You don't need toilet paper to wipe your sweet, pretty, fat ass. I shall eat it all, lick your sweet ass clean with my tongue. Well, at this point, Grace Shaw has now reached out to the police.
Oh!
So, in late October, Jimmy Pell had shown up at Mrs. Shaw's home bearing a letter of introduction to the other alias of Fish, Robert Hayden. Shaw refused to administer the beating Fish requested, saying that based on his age and frail physique, she was afraid she was going to hurt him. She also realized that she is being the victim of a scam and gathered up all the letters, went to the police, and a postal inspector named Kemper was assigned to this case and encouraged her to write some more letters to lure him out. She added more tones of intimacy at this point, so started being like, let's see what he wants. And basically this wanting to lick the shit out of her ass was where she was done, but Kemper encouraged her to get Hayden to come visit her home. So she wrote back again. And their hope was that they were going to be able to ambush him. But the reason of why they wanted to ambush him was another thing. On November 2nd of 1934, Walter Winchell, who was a gossip columnist in New York, he put a piece in there that, I checked on the Grace Budd's mystery. She was 8 when she was kidnapped 6 years ago. It is safe to tell you that the Department of Missing Persons will break the case, or they expect to, in 4 weeks. They are holding a Koki now at Randall's Island, who is the most who is said to know most about the case. Grace is supposed to have been done away with lime, and in another legend, her skeleton is buried in a local spot. And this story was printed with false information given to Winchell by New York City Detective William King. This was to try and get her killer or kidnapper out by putting false information out there. So either to make him panic that they're they're starting to crack down on people and find him, or make him want to set the record straight. So he is known for writing obscene letters and stuff like that. And so he decides that he's going to set the record straight and writes a horrific letter to the Budd family. And I will read this letter again. I will read this letter. It's not like the other letters. And it is graphic, and it is bad. So this is another trigger warning. So Sagraff, please put the alarms on.
Trigger alarm activated.
All right there. So, the letter to the Budd family. My dear Mrs. Budd, in 1894, a friend of mine shipped as a deckhand on the steamer Tacoma, Captain John Davis. They sailed from San Francisco to Hong Kong, China. On arriving there, he and 2 others went ashore, got drunk, and when they returned, the boat was gone. At the time, there was a famine in China. Meat of any kind was $1 to $3 a pound. So great was the suffering among the very poor that all the children under 12 were sold for food in order to keep others from starving. A boy or girl under 14 was not safe in the streets. You'd go to any shop and ask for a steak, chops, or stew meat. Part of the naked body of a girl or boy would be brought out and just what you wanted cut from it. A boy or girl's behind, which is the sweetest part of the body, was sold as veal cutlets. It brings the highest price. John stayed there so long that he acquired a taste for human flesh. On his return to New York, he stole 2 boys, 1 7, 1 11. He took them to his home, stripped them naked, tied them in a closet, then burned everything they had on. Several times a day and night he spanked them, tortured them, to make their meat good and tender. First he killed the 11-year-old boy because he had the fattest ass and, of course, was the most meat on it. Every part of his body was cooked and eaten except the head, bones, and guts. He was roasted in the oven, all of his ass, broiled, fried, and stewed. The little boy was next. He went in the same way. At the time, I was living at 409 East 100th Street. He told me so often how good the human flesh was, and I made up my mind to taste it. On June 3rd, 1928, I called on you at 406 West 15th Street and brought you pot, cheese, and strawberries. We had lunch. Grace sat on my lap and kissed me. I made up my mind to eat her. On the pretense of taking her to a party, you said yes, she could go. I took her to an empty house in Westchester I had already picked out. When we got there, I told her to remain outside. She picked wildflowers. I went upstairs and stripped all my clothes. I knew if I did not, would get her blood on them. When all was ready, I went to the window and called her. Then I hid in the closet until she was in the room. When she saw me all naked, she began to cry and tried to run downstairs. I grabbed her, and she said that she would tell her mama. First, I stripped her naked. How she did kick, bite, and scratch. I choked her to death. Then I cut her in small pieces so I could take the meat to my rooms, cook, and eat it. How sweet and tender her little ass was roasted in the oven. It took me 9 days to finish off her entire body. I did not fuck her, though I could have if I wished. She died a virgin. This letter legitimately was the undoing for him. So Delia was borderline illiterate. So when it arrives on November 12th, she gets Eddie to read it. So the original intended victim. Ed's face went pale and contorted with anger when he read it. He refused to tell his mom what was inside of the letter, and he just ran out the door, handed it to Detective King. So he compared the handwriting to the message from Western Union message in the letter to the Western Union message that was sent on the day back in 1928, and it was the same writing. This was a direct match. So he looked into the letter that Fish had claimed to live at 409th East 100th Street, and while he was there, it was in the main zone that King had already put into the search party efforts originally. So he knew that this had to be close to the killer because it's in the area. He was certain that whoever wrote this letter was the killer. And as he got further into the investigation of this, he found that on the back flap of the envelope, there was a 6-sided symbol with the letters NYPCBA arranged around it. Yeah, 6-sided symbol. So, underneath the emblem was a 2-line address, which the person who sent it tried to obliterate. So there was an address that was trying to be obliterated. They used a magnifying glass and they managed to make out the words 627 Lexington Avenue, New York City, and NYPCBA turns out to be the New York Private Chauffeurs Benevolent Association. So they called the president of the union, Arthur Ennis, and Ennis confirmed that the envelope was an official NYPCBA letter. So they call a meeting, and they looked for any members that were removed stationary from the offices, and while during this meeting, a young man named Lee Sikowski said that months earlier he had taken a few sheets of writing paper and some envelopes for personal use. He said that he had taken the stationery to while he lived at 200 East 52nd Street, room 7. He thought he had left some behind after he moved. So, he had left some behind when he was moving things around, so this would have been there. So, Detective King went to East 52nd Street, found the landlady, Frida Schneider, and he explained that he was looking for a Frank Howard. And Frida said, and gave the description, and Frida said, well, that sounds like Mr. Fish. So she told King that Fish no longer lived there, but he stopped by once a month to pick up a check one of his sons was sending to him at that address, and King basically was like, well, we'll just set up surveillance then because she said that check was coming soon. So, King actually rented room number 7, so where Fish was living, to set up a stakeout. On December 4th, he traces Fish's son to North Carolina, where he's working as a civilian conservation for the Civilian Conservation Court as one of the programs that was set up by FDR. And Fish Jr., he made sure not to tip off Fish Jr., but instructed that the Civilian Conservation Court paymaster let him know as soon as the next paychecks were mailed out. That call came on December 4th with an envelope addressed to Albert Fish, and it was intercepted by the Grand Central Post Office. So on December 13th, Fish shows up at the boarding house to collect his mail. And King, who had to attend a meeting at the police headquarters on that day, receives a frantic call from Mrs. Schneider that Fish was there to get his check. So he asked her to stall him until he can get there. He races out there and finds Fish seated at the kitchen table sipping from a teacup. The old man was dressed in mismatched outfit, a striped trousers, and a tweed jacket. He wore a vest and tie. A black overcoat and battered fedora rested on the chair. King walked in and said, "You're Albert Fish." And Fish silently stared at King for a moment, then pushed back the chair, slowly rose to his feet as King crossed the room, and then when he got close, Fish reached into his vest pocket, pulled out a razor blade, and began slashing at King. King managed to dodge this and then grabbed his wrist and basically flicked the razor blade out of his hand and then said, "I've got you." So Fish was driven to police headquarters, taken to the office of Captain John G. Stein, which is the head of the Missing Person Bureau. And interrogation went through with King himself. He was now 5.5 feet tall, 130 pounds, really wrinkled. He just didn't look like the type of person to be able to kill a bunch of people or do all this. But Fish basically admitted that he was the author of the nasty letter to the Budd family. And then this all got linked together with the post office case as well, because they were all trying to ambush him.
Yeah, and even though they're like, how could this guy kill people? His victims were mostly children.
Yep.
You don't really need to have that much strength for children.
No. So, he wouldn't admit right away to killing Grace. King told him that he was going to bring in the Budd family to spot him in a lineup. And so that's when he just started confessing to killing the little girl. And then he started confessing to a lot of other things. He told King that he originally intended to kill Edward and Willie. Was disappointed when he saw how strong they looked. He had decided he was going to give it a shot until it all changed, like we said. So, as I said, the letter basically says entirely what he did to her. He did eat her body for 9 days. So, the following day, he basically brings them to a wisteria cottage, and they're trying to find Grace's remains. Fish seemed excited when he led the officers to where he tossed the body parts, and they found her remains. They found pieces of her. So, this confirms the story. He's the killer.
I assume it was just bones left.
Yeah, that would be about it. Probably some rotten guts and stuff like that, but yeah. It's been fucking 7 years. Mid-December 1935, he tries to claim insanity. His defense team throughout the trial never tries to say he didn't do it. They try to say he's insane. And the prosecutors are basically arguing that no, he is fucking sane. He knows how wrong this is. Because again, the U.S. law is very clear that insanity defenses, not being criminally responsible, is basically if you know what right and wrong is. So you essentially have to not know what fucking day of the week or where you are in order to be able to use it. Otherwise, you're sane.
Yeah, I was actually a little confused about that for a second.
Yeah. So, he was indicted on kidnapping and murder of Grace Budd, and then they interrogated him for a very long time. They brought in a lot of witnesses. One was Benjamin Eisman. He had encountered Fish 10 years earlier when he was 16. They basically were just going through witnesses that could identify that he had attacked people or had been the person that attacked them. Eisman had been sitting on a bench in Battery Park when Fish sat down and then struck up a conversation. He told Eisman that he was a house painter and he could use a strapping young lad like him as an apprentice, unemployed at the time and desperate for work. Eisman went to accompany Fish to the job in Staten Island. Along the way, Eisman said they passed by a deserted cabin where Fish instructed Eisman to remain outside while he went into the house and fetched his tools. Eisman, was approached by an elderly man who warned him that he had seen many kids go into the house but never come out. So Eisman then basically got the hell out of there. So this Eisman kid at 16 almost became one of his victims as well. If it hadn't been for that old man, that would have been it. March 11th, his trial completely begins. March 11th, 1935, it completely begins. It lasts 2 weeks because this is just about whether or not he's insane. They call a bunch of people, and they said that his diagnosis is basically that he is abnormal but sane. So
Yeah. Sure, he's crazy, but he's aware that he is doing bad things.
Yeah. So during this, Fish's attorney, James Dempsey, tries to contend with it, and he asks Dr. Gregory, who is on the stand to basically say that he is sane, they start asking him, is it a common thing for a man to drink and drink urine and eat human feces? And Gregory responds with, it's not as uncommon as you think. I know successful people, artists, teachers, financiers, who have the same perversion. And then they call up psychiatrist Dr. Charles Lambert, and he added, I know the individuals prominent in society, one individual in particular that we all know. And Dempsey interrupted with, who actually ate human feces? And Lambert responded with, who regularly uses it as a side dish in his salad. So they're basically, it's not that weird. Like, it's not as uncommon as anybody believes. So, no surprise, he's found guilty of the mutilation and premeditated murder of Grace Budd. And he's sentenced to the electric chair 3 days later. He decides to come clean about the murder of Bill Gaffney, come clean about a lot of different mutilations and stuff. Fish told a group of lawyers and investigators in the courtroom that with Bill Gaffney, I took him to the public dumping ground in Riker Avenue in Austria. There's a house near there that I painted for the man that owns it. I took the boy, stripped him naked, tied his hands and feet, and gagged him with a rag, and I picked it up at the dump. He picked up a rag at the dump and gagged him with it.
Ew.
Then I burned his clothes, threw his shoes in the dump. Then I walked back and took the trolley to 59th Street at 2 a.m. and walked from there home. The next day at 2 p.m., I took tools and a homemade cat of nine tails. I whipped his bear behind till the blood ran. So he just tortured this poor kid and then stuck him with a knife, basically. And basically had no remorse whatsoever for this. Yeah, he just goes into full details about eating him and how sweet his pee-pee was. And so, Fish's execution date was originally set for April 29th of 1935, but of course there's more to it. He admitted to more murders. He admitted to the McDonald murder. And then directly after his death sentence, he's sent to Sing Sing to await execution. They keep filing appeals. Goes nowhere. And then January 16th, 1936, that morning, Fish is moved to the death house. He ate a hearty lunch of T-bone steak, ordered a chicken dinner. He basically didn't really eat it, though. He did try to use one of the chicken bones. He used one of the chicken bones that he had kind of chewed and sharpened into, like, basically a shank, and, like, stabbed himself a few times. And it was reported as a suicide attempt, but he actually was trying to get sexual pleasure out of it. Like,
he's trying to kill himself.
No, I'm just trying to jerk off.
Yeah, he's trying to kill himself. Yeah, I'm trying to kill myself. Yeah.
So a Protestant chaplain came. Basically, he gave him his last rites, and then he showed no emotion as he got his first glimpse of the electric chair. He allowed himself to be led towards the apparatus. He slumped forward and brought his hands together in a praying motion. And then they strapped him in. And then his face appeared to be drawn and gaunt the moment before the executioner dropped the black hood over his head, leather cap attached, and they threw the switch to get rid of him. There was a theory that because of all of the pins inside of his body, they were afraid
they go
that the execution would cause the needles inserted to short out the chair.
Oh, God.
And there would be rumors that he had, that it generated a bunch of sparks, but none of that happened. They threw the switch, and his body went rigid, his slight frame strained against the bond, fist clenched, veins bulged. And then when they pulled the switch again, he wasn't dead yet, so they threw it a second time. And that's what killed him at 11:09. His son, Albert Fish Jr., basically said this after his father's death, quote, that Skunk would do anything. Frequently, he used to undress in front of small children. Once someone found him nude in his bedroom, beating himself with a whip. Up a couple of months ago, I worked with him in an apartment house at 1883 Amsterdam Avenue, Manhattan. I did all the work and he collected all the money. He used to wake up often in the middle of the night screaming. Usually it was something like, Bud, Bud. Naturally, I didn't connect it at the time. He quit after the tenants got up a petition against him. There are half a dozen complaints that he abused children. I love that they talk about how great of a dad he is, but his one son's like, he's a lazy fuck.
That is my only and one complaint, is how lazy he is.
And then we got kicked off the job site because I'm molesting kids.
Jesus Christ, Dad! Molest kids off-site!
Yeah. So, that's Albert Fish.
Well, that was an episode.
Yeah, it was long. Fuck. There is so much to cover with him, though. The letters I could have done without a little bit.
Yeah, we probably could have cut midway of those letters and just jumped to the last one.
Yeah.
Because that got a little, that drained me out a little bit.
Oh my God. As I was reading it, I'm like, he says the same thing every time.
It was very repetitive.
I can't imagine being the person reading this letter and being like, this again? Fucking seriously?
All right, well, let's send him a message back. Like,
write him back.
Geez, well, that was one hell of an episode. Holy shit, fuck. Sorry, holy peanut butter. That was a long episode. Whew, I am exhausted. I'm going to drink some Sprite, not cider. Peanut butter.
Cider later.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's our show. Thank you for joining in. If you want to keep in touch, you can follow us on Instagram and Twitter at BA Chaos Jar. You can follow us on Facebook at Chaos Jar Podcast, which is also the name of our YouTube channel. You can follow and tweet me at I'm glad you asked _ and blah 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 blah. What's the next one? Is it the Patreon? Are we at the Patreon yet? Yeah, okay. And lastly, if you want to become a patron, you can go to patreon.com/chaosjar and throw us a couple of bucks. All that in the show notes and more. Probably not more. That's probably just it. But have a good night.